Far more than we think. Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 20. A Passion for Compassion. Compassion is the penultimate point on the spiritual spectrum, and it follows from forgiveness. To forgive and forget is one thing, but to act with kindness and compassion towards someone who has wronged us is challenging, to say the least. Compassion, however, is a wonderful gift, both for the person receiving it and the person giving it. The problem is that it's difficult to be compassionate towards another person when we still have negative feelings about him, or if we feel his suffering is of his own making. It's also challenging to feel compassion for another whilst we still feel badly about ourselves. The key to overcoming these obstacles is to consider how compassionate we feel when we encounter innocence. Our feelings towards an upset child, a timid puppy, or an injured animal are strong. We see the vulnerability or the suffering, and we want to help in any way we can. Compassion is the word that describes these powerful feelings of sympathy, pity, and concern for the misfortune and suffering of others. The more innocent the victim, the more undeserving he is of whatever may have happened to him, the more compassion we feel. Conversely, once we introduce judgment into the equation and take the view that some personal blame and responsibility is involved, our compassion then diminishes. The trouble is that we hold judgments and views about practically everything, including things we don't really know that much about, and pure compassion is not perhaps seen as often as it could. Once again, the cycle of the mind sheds light on what goes on in our heads. We hold imagined truths about a staggering number of subjects, and can be quick to reach judgment on others based on these imagined truths. Our thoughts are so instant that we often don't stop to consider what the apparent, actual, or underlying truths may be. We form a judgment straight away and restrict our forgiveness and compassion accordingly. And if we're naturally of a cynical mindset, then, as we said before, we tend to assume people are guilty until proven innocent. If a deeper truth is subsequently revealed, this may sometimes change our feelings, but we're often reluctant to admit that we were wrong in the first place. Compassion is not always easily forthcoming, even once deeper truths are known. I'm saying this not because I have a particularly jaundiced view of the world, but because I know how judgmental and cold-hearted I've been in the past. I've experienced how my own self-righteousness has prevented me from being more compassionate. I've also been on the receiving end of judgment and a lack of forgiveness, based on imagined truths, and this has caused me to feel misunderstood. It may just be me, but I suspect that many other people have experienced shortfalls in compassion, both in the giving and the receiving. I had not understood until relatively recently the enormously powerful impact childhood conditioning has on our adult behaviour. I will cover the interplay of the conscious and subconscious minds in more detail later, but for now we can at least take into account the notion that messages received and traumas experienced in the early years of life have a significant impact on our imagined truths. We have behaviours and beliefs drummed into us by people we trust and love at the time, when we have no ability to discern good from bad or helpful from unhelpful. My view on the relative impact of nature versus nurture has moved strongly in favour of nurture since learning more about the power of the subconscious mind. It now seems logical and sensible to conclude that we are largely the result of the programming and conditioning that we received in our childhoods. The die was pretty much cast by the time we reached the age of 7 or so. As a parent, I look back with some concern that I was still relatively immature at the time my children were of that age. They've each turned out wonderfully well, but it would be dishonest of me to say I knew what I was doing. I did the best I could, but I didn't really know what the best was. I doubt I ever will. My understanding now is that each of us had a unique experience of childhood that has armed us with a set of beliefs and imagined truths through which we judge and react to the world at large. Most of this happens automatically in the subconscious, and it's not until we step slightly away from our thinking and observe what's going on that we're in any position to actually change anything. The good news is that these ingrained beliefs and ways of thinking can change if we're willing to allow them to. As we discussed earlier, it's all a matter of a broader perspective through increased awareness and consciousness, and then growth along the spiritual spectrum. So, with respect to compassion, the greater the perception of innocence, the stronger the feeling of compassion. It's probably too much to conclude that everyone is innocent all of the time, but it is possible to see that we were all innocent as babies, and that much of our thinking and behaviour has been pre-programmed before we could prevent it. Most of our adult learning goes into the conscious mind and will probably not change the subconscious. We are all responsible adults and should know better, but in truth we often behave in baffling ways that we know we shouldn't. Some of us have crippling regret and shame around what we have done. Some of us brush it off by going into denial mode. I believe, perhaps naively, that deep down we all know right from wrong, but frequently can't help ourselves. Well, this leaves us with a double dilemma. We don't see the innocence in others, so we're unlikely to feel or behave with much forgiveness or compassion. We don't experience much forgiveness or compassion in life because often our behaviour does not warrant it. If we don't receive much compassion, we're less likely to feel compassionate towards others. In other words, we don't scratch another's back until ours is scratched first. We withhold compassion because we don't receive it ourselves, and we also withhold compassion because we feel others don't deserve it. Well, this all sounds a bit negative and harsh, and I do not wish to undermine all the compassion, kindness and acts of generosity that do take place in the world. My point is not that everyone behaves dreadfully all of the time, but that there is scope for significantly more compassion, generally speaking. Only we will know how compassionate we are towards others, and indeed towards ourselves. I have gradually become far less judgmental and far more compassionate in my feelings towards others. Human beings are perfectly imperfect. I see myself as flawed, and I see everyone else the same way. We are all of one spirit, and are all comprised of that which is human nature. A broader perspective allows me to see the deeper truths, so my thoughts, feelings, behaviours and experiences are all more positive than they used to be. I've also experienced and witnessed firsthand the powerful truth that we do reap what we sow. I'm now certain in the knowledge that as I give to the world, so the world gives to me. If we want to receive, we must first give. This is the way it works. As we give to others, so we give to ourselves. Learning includes unlearning. In this book, we're not just adding new knowledge to the things we already know, we're unlearning things that no longer serve us. New information will not necessarily change our lives, but changing our minds will. I used to strongly believe that in order for me to give anything away, I first needed to make sure that I had enough of it for myself. This selfish belief turns out to have been the polar opposite of the truth. In order for us to freely receive anything, we must first be prepared to give it away. This truth can apply to all aspects of our lives, and I will explain the theory behind how it works in a later chapter. But when it comes to compassion, it's easy to do, because we already have all the compassion inside us that we could ever possibly need. We are overflowing with compassion, yet we withhold it far more often than we need to. Acceptance, gratitude, surrender, humility, non-judgment, and forgiveness will all inevitably lead to a passion for compassion. Giving of our infinite compassion is self-nourishing. We will reap a harvest far greater than we can possibly imagine.